Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video from Tomorrow's World in which we discuss whether or not humans are unique, and if evolution is eroding the belief in human uniqueness. In my opinion, this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, in order to be defined as a species separate from another species, there has to be at least one trait that makes that species unique. So just the fact that we are the species Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens sapiens if you want to be pedantic, that means that we are unique from anything that is not a member of the Homo sapiens sapiens species. But on the other hand, we are innately connected to the rest of the species on the planet through our evolutionary relationships, so those traits that make us unique or special among animals do not actually separate us from the animals. Anywho, let's go!
Greeting and welcome to another Tomorrow's World webcast. My name is Wallace Smith. It's great to have you here.
Well, Wallace, it's great to be here. Especially now that I have an air conditioner. The office is still the hottest room in the house, but now hottest room in the house is much more comfortable than it was pre-AC. And if anyone asks, I got the AC for the fish. Easiest way to cool off a fish tank is to control the temperature of the room. And a window air conditioner that is rated for the size of the main floor of my house costs about the same as a fish tank chiller that would cool the fish tank while blowing hot air into the house. Also, I have 3 fish tanks, so it would actually cost 3 times as much as the air conditioner to properly cool all the tanks. And I have a feeling that this now marks the end of any pleasantries. We are probably about to not like each other from here on out.
There was a poll commissioned by the Discovery Institute.
Yeah, there's your problem right there. The Discovery Institute is really good at phrasing things in a way that gets people to answer in the way that they want them to answer to conform to their narrative. Just look at this scientific dissent from Darwinism that they put out. It was phrased in a way that any good scientist would be comfortable agreeing with, but in a way that is easy to present with an anti-evolutionary spin to the general public. It stated, "We are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutations and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged." To a layperson, an agreement with such a statement is really easy to spin as, see, these guys disagree with evolution. But to someone with a more nuanced understanding, we can recognize that the statement is presenting evolution as being the sole result of specifically Darwinian natural selection, which is not the sole driving force of evolution. So can random mutations and natural selection account for the complexity of life? By themselves? No. But they do not work by themselves. Most people just aren't aware of the other mechanisms like horizontal gene transfer, endosymbiosis, sexual selection, and genetic drift, to name a few. And then there's the follow-up. The careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. What evolution-accepting scientist would disagree with that? That's just a description of good science. In any scientific field, a careful examination of the evidence should always be encouraged. And even with this deceptive wording, they could still only get just over 1,000 PhD or MD holders to sign it in the last 2 decades. And they accepted anyone with a PhD or MD, so there's a lot of people with expertise in unrelated fields like computer engineering or dentistry who signed it. I'm not going to go through the list to figure out what the proportions are now, but back in 2008, when it only had around 500 signatories, only about 25% of them had a degree relevant to evolution. And to put this in perspective, Project Steve, which was put together by the National Center for Science Education, is a similar list to the scientific dissent from Darwinism, except that it affirms an acceptance of evolution and has over 1,400 signatories. And rather than just accepting anyone with an advanced degree, they limit it to people with an advanced degree but are also named Steve, or one of the several variations of Steve. Also, it's worth pointing out that whenever these two lists are compared by someone who is willing to actually count up how many people have what kind of degrees on the lists, Project Steve is always well ahead of the Discovery Institute for the ratio of biologist to non-biologist. As of 2012, it was 58.9% of signatories for Project Steve and 30.7% for the Discovery Institute. In sum, the Discovery Institute got a few hundred PhD holders, most of whom are heavily involved in the evangelical Christian churches, to sign a statement that, when removed from the context of the creation versus evolution debate, any good scientist would actually agree with, even if they fully accept evolution, while Project Steve got a bunch more scientists to sign a statement that affirms their acceptance of evolution, but with a much more restrictive qualification that you have to be named Steve or some variation of Steve before you can sign. So, given this, I am hesitant to trust the results of a survey commissioned by the Discovery Institute.
The results were published on April 5th, 2016. And the title of the report is just this: New poll reveals evolution's corrosive impact on beliefs about human uniqueness.
Yeah, evolution probably does impact that view. And even given how little I trust the Discovery Institute to design a survey, I would be willing to bet that even a properly designed survey would show a similar result. If you accept the evolutionary history of humanity, then you accept that we are animals. If you accept that we are animals, then you probably don't view us as being specially unique and set apart from the animals.
It really is fascinating to me. The poll was actually conducted in the month of March by SurveyMonkey.
The survey itself may have been performed by SurveyMonkey. That is a fairly easy way to get a decent-sized survey done for pretty cheap. I mean, I just ran through the survey creation process, and it would cost me about $300 to get a basic survey done with over 200 respondents, which isn't huge, but it's big enough to get a general population cross-section. But it was designed by the people at the Discovery Institute. Anyone can get a survey out to as many people as they are willing to pay for with SurveyMonkey. It doesn't have to be a well-designed survey to qualify. In other words, the fact that they used SurveyMonkey is completely irrelevant and is only being brought up to borrow from their credibility, since they have been used for legitimate research.
SurveyMonkey may not inspire a whole lot of confidence, but actually they do a lot of poll survey work for they even list here NBC News, Los Angeles Times. So they actually surveyed more than 3,000 people.
Yeah, SurveyMonkey's name doesn't make them sound super scientific, but it is a good anonymous data collection tool that has been used by scientists in their published works on a number of occasions.
And the results are actually pretty fascinating. Let me just read a few selections from this report. They write, from the earliest days of civilization, humans have considered themselves exceptional among living creatures.
Yeah, it's called conceit. Once we developed civilization, we looked around at other animals that had not developed civilization and thought that we must be better than them because we figured this cooperation thing out. Of course, there are animals that rival us in what we do. Termites build mountains that, when compared to how big a termite is, rival human skyscrapers. Several species of birds and insects build shelters for themselves out of raw materials harvested from their environment. Tool use is not that uncommon among animals, with examples of tool use being found all throughout mammals, both terrestrial and aquatic, birds, reptiles, cephalopods, and fish. Farming is a well-known behavior in some species of ant, with ants that grow and tend to fungus, and ants that raise herds of aphids, even going so far as to use chemical sedatives on the aphids and crippling their wings to prevent escape. But there are also thousands of species of weevil that farm fungus. There are fish that farm algae, and there are deep sea crabs that farm bacteria. Hell, even the use of sex toys has been observed in chimpanzees. Any trait that sets humanity apart from the animal kingdom, when examined closely, doesn't actually set us all that far apart. You could argue that intelligence is that trait, but intelligence is a surprisingly difficult trait to measure. It depends on what you mean by intelligence. Certainly our brains are more neurologically complex than any other animal, but the degree of complexity does seem to match up with general intelligence and problem-solving skills. In other words, the animals with the more complex brains tend to be the more intelligent ones. But even here, a measure of intelligence is not always easy. Some birds have been said to reach intelligence levels equivalent to a 2-year-old child. Raccoons, while not passing intelligence tests quite as well as birds, often just completely upend the test by not doing them properly and figuring out novel solutions. When a marshmallow is placed in a water tube that is too long for them to reach down, they were supposed to figure out that putting stones in the water would raise the water level to where they could reach it. Researchers had the tube attached so that it couldn't just be tipped over, but one raccoon managed to tip it over anyway. Does that count as a fail because it thought creatively rather than just doing what was expected? In the next round of tests, they were given sinking and floating balls. To pass would be to use the sinking ball to raise the water level, but one raccoon would throw a floating ball down in the tube fast enough that it would splash the marshmallow bits onto the sides of the tube where it could then reach them. Another one figured out that it could reach the floating ball while it was floating and could spin it and pick off marshmallow bits that stuck to it while it spun. What does this say about their intelligence? These behaviors both technically counted as failing that intelligence test, but what does it actually say about their intelligence? At any rate, intelligence is just not a straightforward thing to measure, and it does seem to correlate with brain complexity. So while our brains are the most complex, it's a matter of degree rather than a matter of being completely separate and designed to be more conducive to intelligence. Chimps have all the same basic brain functions that we do, but their brains just aren't quite as intricate, so while they are quite intelligent, they don't quite match us. The potential is definitely there, though.
But a new survey of more than 3,400 American adults indicates that the theory of evolution is beginning to erode that belief in humanity's unique status and dignity.
Given the shit job that we've done in taking care of the planet, that might be a good thing. Humanity is pretty much 100% responsible for the mass extinction event that we're in the middle of right now. Over the last 10,000 years, we've basically messed things up through our farming and industrialization processes that have caused the species extinction rate to be 100 times the normal background rate, conservatively speaking. Because of the sketchy nature of the fossil record, it could actually be as much as 1,000 times the normal background rate. So if we were to stop believing that we are somehow special and that we don't need to worry about what we do to the planet because God promised that he wouldn't flood it again, therefore burning it down is fine, then maybe we can actually start to work toward fixing the mess that we've made. The conceited notion that we are somehow better than the rest of the natural world is something that probably does more harm than good, so it is probably a good thing that it is going away.
It says, according to the survey, 43% of Americans now agree that, quote, evolution shows that no living thing is more important than any other.
If that was how the question was worded, then I have a few issues. Firstly, 43% acceptance of evolution is abysmally low. Secondly, a better way to get accurate answers from people would be to ask 3 separate questions here, rather than lumping the potentially 3 questions into one leading question. So, for instance, start with, do you accept the theory of evolution as the explanation for the diversity of life? Followed by, no living thing is more important than any other, agree or disagree? Followed by, my acceptance of the theory of evolution leads me to believe that no living thing is more important than any other, agree or disagree? That way, rather than lumping the conclusion that you're looking for directly into the question, you instead get to parse out the different potential positions. So maybe you don't accept evolution, but you do believe that humans are not fundamentally more important than animals. Maybe you accept evolution, but you believe that humans are a somehow more important organism. The phrasing of the question as it is would also encourage young Earth creationists to agree with the statement based on their skewed understanding of evolution. So they might not accept evolution itself, but after watching a bunch of creationist material talking about evolution teaches this and evolution teaches that, they might still agree that evolution teaches that no living thing is more important than any other. The fact that this one question is poorly phrased and could lead to misleading results makes me think that the rest of the survey might have been equally poorly designed. Unfortunately, only websites that are reporting on the results of the survey are what I can find. The Discovery Institute page that had the actual survey with the results doesn't appear to be up anymore. So I can't really see whether they were asking questions that might have primed the survey takers toward giving certain answers in future questions. Survey design is incredibly important if you want accurate data.
And 45% of Americans believe that, quote, evolution shows that human beings are not fundamentally different from other animals.
And yeah, I would agree with that statement as well. But again, it should be split up into different questions to parse out the different reasons why someone might have chosen the agree option for that question. But it's true, any trait that seems to set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom can be found, at least in a rudimentary form, in other members of the animal kingdom. Morality, altruism, intelligence, tool use, building structures, altering our environment, it all happens out in nature too, to one degree or another. So until we find a trait that we possess that is actually fundamentally different than any other traits possessed by any other animals, that statement will remain true, whether you agree with it or not. And just to cut off the commenters that I know are coming, the soul doesn't count as a trait that we have. It has to be something that can actually be demonstrated to exist.
Let me jump ahead. It says also, the theory of evolution is also reshaping how people think about morality. A majority of Americans, 55%, now contend that, quote, evolution shows that moral beliefs evolve over time based on their survival value in various times and places.
Again, that is a very poorly phrased question. But yes, morality does change. Only a couple hundred years ago, it was considered moral to own other human beings as property in the United States. Today, most people would consider that practice to be immoral. The morality shifted, and it wasn't Christianity that was responsible for the shift. The Bible was being used to argue both for and against slavery, because while there are plenty of passages about loving others and behaving respectfully toward your fellow human beings, there are also plenty of passages that are, at best, neutral on the issue of slavery, telling slaves to obey their earthly masters, followed up by a plea to slave owners to treat their slaves well. And that's just the New Testament. If you go to the Old Testament, there are instructions on how to beat your slave, and how to trap a temporary indentured servant into becoming a permanent slave, and how to sell your daughter into slavery. So there are several places where the Bible explicitly allows slavery, and not one single place where it explicitly condemns the practice. And yet today, most people, even among young Earth creationists, would probably agree that slavery is immoral, thereby showing that morality has evolved over time. And while survival value does not necessarily come into play, it can certainly be a contributing factor. Most people would agree that stealing is wrong. But most people would also agree that stealing food to feed a starving child is morally acceptable if you don't have the means to buy the food legally. Being in a survival situation makes things that would normally be considered immoral become morally neutral.
Oh, this is depressing to me.
It's depressing to you that slavery is no longer considered moral? That says a lot.
Depressing might be too strong a word because I've expected it. In fact, if you want, at the end of this webcast, please feel free and take a look at a telecast, actually, that we did not too long ago, I don't think.
What's the difference between a webcast and a telecast? Is it that one is on TV and the other's on the web? But then you go to the web to watch the telecast. Sorry, I know this doesn't matter. It's a meaningless quibble about a meaningless distinction. It's just weird.
You can find it on our website at tomorrowsworld.org. You can just go to the search box and look for it. But the title was 3 Dangerous Lies of Evolution.
Yeah, that one's on my list. Spoiler, none of the statements that he presents as the lies of evolution are actually necessary outcomes of a belief in evolution.
The idea that somehow evolution is a morally neutral belief or understanding simply is not true.
No, it is morally neutral. Like, allele frequencies change in populations over time. That is a morally neutral statement. It doesn't say anything about morality one way or the other. Certainly it is possible to draw conclusions from that starting point that are what we might consider either moral or immoral, but evolution by itself remains morally neutral. Consider the following. The statement, God exists, is morally neutral. That statement by itself does not inform morality one way or the other. But then if you start making claims about what this God wants us to do or not do, these claims then become moral statements. It is wrong for homosexuals to get married because God said so and God exists, so his word is law. That is a moral statement that can be drawn as the conclusion from the beginning point of God exists. But there's also the statement, it is morally right for homosexuals to get married because God is love, and what is marriage but an agreement to love your partner, so of course God approves. That is also a moral statement that can be drawn as a conclusion from the beginning point of God exists. The fact that you can draw opposite moral conclusions from the same starting statement means that this statement is necessarily morally neutral. Same goes for evolution. Eugenics can be justified by appealing to evolution, even though most people consider eugenics to be morally abhorrent. But an attitude of care, dignity, and respect toward not only fellow humans, but also to other organisms that we share the planet with, can also be justified by appealing to evolution, and most people would consider that to be a morally positive position to hold. Since you can draw drastically different moral conclusions from the same starting point, it then stands to reason that evolution is itself morally neutral.
One of the major foundations of our society is the concept that humanity is something special.
And our society is royally screwing up the planet that we have to share with other organisms purely for our own short-term gain. Perhaps a reevaluation of that founding principle is warranted at this point.
That humans mean something. You know, when a lion kills a zebra, we don't accuse the lion of murder.
Well, since murder is an unlawful killing by definition, we would first need to make it illegal for a lion to kill a zebra. Then it would be murder. Well, still not really, because it's the unlawful killing of a human by another human. I think the idea there is mostly that humans have the cognitive ability to know that other humans don't like it when we kill people indiscriminately, whereas other animals do not. But we do punish animals for dangerous behavior toward humans, even though we recognize that they don't necessarily know better. A dog that has violent predispositions will be put down after multiple attacks have been attributed to it. Nobody argues that the dog is behaving immorally or is attempting murder because we know that it isn't cognitively aware of the consequences of its actions.
When we eat a hamburger, we don't accuse humans of murder.
You don't know many vegetarians or vegans, do you?
But when a person kills another person, we do accuse that person of murder.
Depending on the circumstances. If that person killed in self-defense, we do not call it murder. If they killed an enemy soldier in a war, we do not call it murder. If they are a representative of the state executing a convicted criminal, we do not call it murder. Though I would argue that that one fits the bill pretty well, except for the technicality that it is a legal killing. It is the killing of another human being with premeditation, the kind of murder that is punished the most harshly when it's not condoned by the government. What do you get in Texas if you plan to kill someone and then follow through on that plan? You get someone planning to kill you and then following through on that plan. The distinction seems pretty fragile there.
Murder is something that's unique to human beings in this way.
You don't know much about the animal kingdom, do you? There are fish that will kill members of their own species for trespassing on their territory. Don't believe me? Try keeping 2 male betta fish in a 5-gallon aquarium and let me know how it goes. There's a reason they're called Siamese fighting fish. There are hummingbirds that have specialized sharp beaks that the males use to stab each other when competing for a mate. Meerkats are the most murderous mammals there are, with an estimated 20% of all meerkats dying by meerkat attack. But aside from a few outlier species like the meerkat, primates are by and large the most murderous group, being on average 8 times more likely to kill members of their own species than other mammal groups. So tell me again how murder is a uniquely human trait. I mean, I guess it technically is because the definition of the word specifies human, but using that technicality to say that we are unique is more than a bit of a stretch.
That we're actually killing someone unlawfully for terrible reasons. Why does it mean something different? Because people are different than animals.
Are we, though? I'm still waiting for someone to name a trait that humans have that can't be found in some rudimentary form in nature. Codified laws? Primates have social structures with rules. Closest thing I can think of to a trait that fits the bill is writing. There are no animals that I am aware of that have developed even a rudimentary system of writing. But written language would naturally come after the development of verbal language, and verbal language is something that many animals do have a rudimentary form of. So I don't see writing as being a trait that is only possible for humans. We can also watch the evolution of humanity's ability to write language down, with older ancient Sumerian examples being mostly pictographic before developing towards a phonetic system of several centuries later. We can even see that written language developed at least 3 times independently. China developed their system of writing in about 1200 BCE when it started as etchings on oracle bones that represented different events, which over time became more and more complex, eventually evolving into Chinese written language. A similar progression happened with Mayan glyphs, with them likely having their origins in the Olmec pictographs, and gradually evolving into a complex writing system over the course of several centuries. My point is, this one trait that I can think of that actually might be used to set us apart from the rest of the animals is something that clearly developed slowly over time, and was initially used as a representation of verbal language, something that does have rudimentary animal versions.
That's a bedrock belief to our entire civilization, our entire moral code. And if you think morality isn't important, that morality is also the basis of our legal code.
Yeah, morality was likely the starting point of humans developing laws, but as I said, we can see primate societies with different rules of interactions with members that violate these rules being punished. So, once again, not a specifically human trait. Also, there have been several points throughout history where some laws have been considered to be immoral. In fact, there's a whole process in jury-based legal systems known as jury nullification, where a jury can essentially render a verdict that is contrary to the law. So, for example, the law says that a man harboring escaped slaves must go to jail, but the jury thinks slavery is wrong, so they return a verdict of not guilty despite the evidence clearly showing the defendant to be guilty. That goes both ways, though. Sure, that happened a lot in the North before emancipation, but in the South around the same time, there were cases where juries would refuse to convict someone who was clearly guilty of a lynching. So that one can cut either way. In other words, the laws of a society generally, though not always, reflect the morality of the society. As societies change, laws change as well. Slavery is no longer legal, and as such, people who help escaped slaves can no longer be legally punished for it, as slavery is itself illegal. And then, of course, there are the morally neutral laws that are just arbitrary agreed-upon standards. Why is the highway speed limit 100 kilometers an hour rather than 90 or 110? Well, in some places it is 90, in others it is 110. Sometimes there's a reason for it. Where the speed limit goes down to 90, it's usually a spot where there's heavy traffic and lots of twists and turns in the road, so slower is seen as safer. But there are long, straight stretches near me that are both 100 and 110, with no real difference in traffic volume or the quality of the road. It is purely arbitrary.
Here in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 2, when Noah got off the ark with a whole bunch of animals, God said something very specific. He said, "In the fear of you," speaking to Noah and his children, "the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand."
Well, add that to the list of Bible verses that cannot be taken literally, no matter how literally you take the rest of the story. My cat is not afraid of me. Neither are my fish. And I once had a cockatiel that was rescued from a bad situation, so he was afraid of us to begin with, but with careful training and proper treatment, he came to trust us. He was also a really weird bird. He would regularly climb onto his bars and flip upside down and hold his wings out in the American bald eagle pose. Poor thing was so stressed at his previous home that he plucked his own feathers out, but he was recovering quite nicely with us before his death. Man, I miss that crazy bird.
In other words, you have reign over the world. The animals, we don't have the best relationship all the time, but you're something higher. You're something different.
No, that was another etiology. Genesis is full of etiological explanations, that is, stories that explain the origin of some aspect of life. Why do snakes have legs? Punishment for tricking Eve into eating the fruit. Why does giving birth hurt? That was Eve's punishment for the fruit. Why is it that no matter how meticulously I weed my garden, more weeds pop up seemingly out of nowhere? The fall. Why are animals afraid of us? Because God made it that way after the flood.
But what about people? It's interesting, we actually see the foundation of why murder is murder in the same chapter. He says in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man."
And there's another one that you can't take completely literally, otherwise humanity would have come to an end as a result of the first murder. Murderer kills someone, so an executioner kills the murderer, but that is also shedding man's blood, so a new executioner is now needed to kill that executioner, and so on until everybody is now dead. But that would be absurd, so of course it's not literal. But whatever, that's not the point. The point is the made in the image of God claim. The thing with that is that most Christians that I've had this conversation with do not believe that this refers to physical appearance, but either our possession of a soul or some trait that the person believes to be uniquely human, like morality. Except that any trait that I have ever heard suggested to represent this can be found in the animal kingdom, and the existence of a soul has never been successfully demonstrated. So to me, that just looks like an assertion rather than an explanation.
Man is remarkably unique. We have so many materials on tomorrowsworld.org that talk about that. And the idea that, well, it just doesn't make a difference, it's science, it makes a huge difference.
No, I'd agree. It does make a huge difference. I don't have the hubris to think that the all-powerful creator of the universe made me somehow special out of all his other creations, so I am more likely to have a higher level of respect for the rest of his creations, if indeed he did create them. In other words, the belief that you are made in the image of an all-powerful creator of everything who also thinks you are special and wants to have a personal relationship with you ultimately has negative consequences, so that's a belief that I wouldn't mind seeing disappear into the list of beliefs throughout history that we now consider strange.
If someone were to, forgive me, I love our cat. I don't love the cat as much as some others do, but I love our cat. If someone were to kill my cat callously, I am going to be really angry. I mean, I really am. I am going to seek whatever means I have in the law to see that person prosecuted for cruelty or whatever the case is. But if someone were to kill one of my children, don't even think that's in the same kind of category.
Well, as much as it's not legally in the same category, I guarantee you that there will be comments on my video from cat people admonishing you for not considering your cat to be of equivalent value as the other members of the family. But yeah, it makes perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective that we would consider killing a member of our own species to be more shocking than killing a member of another species. So you are actually arguing a conclusion that is easy to arrive at from the starting point of evolution. Just because someone who accepts evolution might not consider humanity as a whole to be somehow elevated or more important than other animals, does not mean that they are not affected by the evolutionarily programmed reactions to shocking situations.
Really, the kinds of effects that evolution is having on us, the belief in evolution, I should say, it's robbing us even of what the word humane even means anymore.
Oh no! The usage of a word evolved outside of its original etymology. Whatever shall we do?
We expect people to act humanely towards others. And yet if mankind is just another animal, animals don't behave humanely toward others.
Some do. Empathy is a common trait among mammals in particular. And really, you need to make up your mind. First, you are saying that murder is a uniquely human trait, so I list examples of animals murdering each other. And now you're turning around and saying that we can't be humane if we accept evolution. And yet, had I accepted your earlier point about animals not murdering each other, then that would show that the animals behave more humanely towards each other than humans, would it not? This strikes me as the kind of thing that you can't have both ways. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from the River of Faith, who's always good for a bit of fun, and says, "Everyone has a conscience and the free will to follow their conscience, but their conscience is not always correct, but it leads you to God. By keeping God's 10 Commandments and the teachings of Jesus, you can never go wrong." Firstly, if your conscience can be wrong, but it still leads you to God, does that make God wrong? Secondly, if you're keeping the 10 Commandments and the teachings of Jesus, I'm wondering why you're skipping the hundreds of other commandments in the Bible, especially since one of the teachings of Jesus is that not a jot or tittle shall pass from the law as long as heaven and earth endure. I'm also wondering which version of the 10 Commandments you're referring to, as the only one that the Bible explicitly labels the 10 Commandments are not the ones that are typically revered by Christians. They're the ones that tell you to do things like celebrate the Feast of Weeks and not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. It's also the one that has the commandment about sacrificing firstborn males of all your livestock, and then goes on to use very similar language when referring to your firstborn sons. So the only commandments in the Bible that the Bible actually refers to as the 10 Commandments are the ones that are easiest to interpret as promoting human sacrifice. Also, another one of the teachings of Jesus is that you only need 6 commandments to be perfect, and one of the 6 that he lists aren't even in the 10 Commandments, not even the 10 Commandments that Christians like to quote. When Jesus was explicitly asked which commandments needed to be kept to get into heaven, he didn't just respond with all of them, or the 10 Commandments, he just listed 6. And that was just what to do to enter life, which is generally meant as a euphemism for getting into heaven. You don't even have to be perfect to enter life. Giving up all your possessions and following Jesus is the final step to becoming perfect, but just keeping 6 commandments is good enough to get into heaven, according to Jesus anyway. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, especially Mark McManus, who are the jury who nullified God's law to get me into heaven. If you'd like to make sure I have eternal bliss, you can support the channel for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. Other ways to support the channel, such as direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, are linked in the description, as well as my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address. See you next time!